I now call to order the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority Citizens Oversight Committee meeting of September 27th, 2023. Martina, back to you for a roll call.
And just before we proceed with roll call today, I did want to announce to the committee that Vice Chair Kingston Cole is attending remotely. Vice Chair Cole, can you kind of give us a description of why you are not attending with us today, sir?
Yeah, my wife had a birthday yesterday and went over and had 6 of her friends at someone's home inside. And the hostess called this morning and said she had COVID. So, it's just, I thought I'd give everybody a break and wait 4 days and see what happens. So just a courtesy. So sorry I can't be there.
So we will need for the committee to grant permission to Kingston to attend remotely, or either by consensus or via vote.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
Everybody's in favor?
And so I will just state for the record that the committee has approved Kingston Cole's request to attend today's meeting virtually.
Thank you.
Member Cole, are there any people in the room with you who are over the age of 18?
No.
No. Okay, perfect. So moving on with roll call. We do not have Member Biggs with us today. Larry Chu.
Here.
We do not have Member Dilworth today. John McCauley.
Present.
Larry Minigus.
Here.
Pat Randolph. Rebecca Suggs.
Present.
Vice Chair Cole.
Present.
And Chair Howard.
Here. Thank you. Are there any adjustments to the agenda requested? I'll note that I think the executive committee was canceled and Lucy's not here, and it will be Pat reporting for the board of directors. Now open time for public expression. Martina, are there any members of the public here?
We do not currently have any attendees, virtually or in person.
Okay, thank you. We can move on. Mark, you're up. Executive officers report.
Good evening, everybody. So our biggest focus right now is the end of year closeout. We asked each of the member agencies to send us reports about local and D-space spending by September 30th. We received many of the reports. We still have a few outstanding, and we're sending reminders out to the people with outstanding reports. And it is a spreadsheet that lists the project name, project number, amount authorized, amount spent, why there is a discrepancy, and what they're going to, if they underspent, what they're going to be using the money for. So far, pleased with the process. And we also have a attestation that we built into it for local and D-space to say that these money will be put in, if they underspent on local and D-space, that they will put them in a reserve account only for MWPA type activities. We're also closing out on our core budget. I'm really pleased with the work progress that we had for 22-23. The numbers aren't final, but the numbers are looking really good, that we did a good job of spending the money that we're supposed to be spending, and not only spending it, but spending it on worthwhile projects. So I'm excited about that. On October 11th, we'll have a finance committee meeting in order for them to close out the core budget, transfer any unspent from one project to another, just to balance out the budget. Speaking of the finance committee meeting on the 11th, we have received our audit. It's pretty clean. In fact, there's no recommendations and there were no responses required from us. It will go to the finance committee meeting for their approval to send it to the board on October 19th. We do have 2 VM vegetation management specialists that will be starting Monday of next week. And we have a grant specialist that started Monday 2 days ago to replace Maria Schmidt. And we'll give an introduction to the board of the 3 new members on October 19th. But one of them you already know, Josh Hampshire. And I'll just tell you now, Josh Hampshire is picking up the grant program. So it's a known quantity, someone who has institutional knowledge of the organization, has a lot of energy, and he's already producing in the 2 days that he's been here. We're very pleased with that. Another thing that I'm excited about is that we are on the home stretch for the evacuation ingress egress risk assessment. It's going to the executive committee for what's called the current risk assessment report, and also to dig into the GIS data and the mapping data that is the main impetus of the evacuation ingress egress risk assessment. And there's a large policy decision that needs to be made by the board, one that we've been trying to decide what level of information sharing in this evac ingress egress risk assessment do we want to share with the public. At first, we were taking a conservative approach, thinking that when people see data like this, there has been adverse reactions to it, saying, you've made my home value go down. You've made my home uninsurable. The insurance companies are going to take a look at this and non-renew me. But then we started looking at the last several years of this type of data being released. The local or our parcel level risk assessment that's been online as an available map for 3 years. Not a single person has called and said that parcel level risk assessment has caused me to lose my insurance. That parcel level risk assessment has caused my home value to go down. The new release of the CAL FIRE hazard severity maps, not a peep. 5-10 years ago, when those maps, those types of products were released, people got concerned, but people have gotten used to that data coming out with no adverse reaction. Quite frankly, the insurance companies don't care about our data. They care about their data. And we have not seen home values drop because of that data. So staff's recommendation to the board is put the data out there. And the risk of not being transparent is greater than the risk of any adverse reactions that we could have. So that's the recommendation that we will be making to the board. Zoom bombing, we kind of talked about this before the meeting started. Several public entities have been getting Zoom bombed within their meetings, and it's all been remote. It's been Novato, Larkspur, and one other community. Yeah, Tiburon, thank you. Those are the 3 communities that have been Zoom bombed here in Marin. Several in Sonoma County have been Zoom bombed, including Santa Rosa City schools. So it's not like it's just all at Board of Supervisors or council levels. They're starting to get to some other committees. I'm not sure if the MWPA is going to rise to their awareness. However, we are planning on how we will address any Zoom bombing that occurs. And it's, I'm sure you guys know, it's racist and anti-Semitic Zoom bombing, and it's disgusting. And I'm going to end on a good note, though, for our for the executive officer's report, and that is our own Larry Minikis is being recognized as Volunteer of the Year with MCL. So congratulations, Larry.
Wow.
And with that, I'll take any questions.
I just want to make a comment that if any of you haven't seen the last board meeting, to go to 1 hour and 20 minutes in the board meeting when Danny Franco gives his forced health, what's it called?
Forced health strategy.
Strategy. And it's really informative. It's about 20 to 30 minutes long, but it's definitely worth watching, Danny. So that's my comment. Thank you.
And if you want to find someone that loves his job, watch him. He loves his work.
And question?
Yes, Rebecca.
Mark, what's involved with Zoom bombing? Do they just call in?
So they log in on the Zoom just like any of our remote meetings are able to. And when it comes to public comment, they raise their hand, and for their 2 or 3 minutes, whatever allocation they have, they go off on anti-Semitic and racist rants.
Yeah.
Jeez. Thanks.
Kingston.
Yes, Kingston.
Yeah, the Zoom bombing thing, at cost, we're taking a real look at this as well. We've already pulled down some guidelines, and some ways of trying to deal with this that we'll be glad to share with you, Mark. Okay?
Please do. I would appreciate that.
Okay. All right.
In our description of open time for public expression, it states quite clearly that comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. So I don't know whether that means we have an opportunity to terminate.
It's a fine line between respectful and First Amendment rights.
Right.
Yes, I
right.
understand. Okay, any further questions or comments?
Okay.
And I assume we still don't have any public. Okay, great, moving on. Okay, we're moving on to the consent calendar with no public. Does any, I'm assuming we didn't pull anything out yet of the consent calendar, so.
If I may offer without pulling the item, some additions or some agenda, or excuse me, some minutes adjustments for the August 23 minutes.
Yes,
Under, you know what? I'm just going to screen share. I think it'll make it easier. And I'll let you guys read the screen share, and then we can make a motion that says inclusive of the recommendations from member Randolph.
So 7C.
Go me, I can
Yeah,
increase.
no, I see it. I see it.
Okay.
I move we accept the consent calendar items A and B, subject to the adjustments which are on the screen.
Just a second.
do we need a second for that?
No, I have a problem.
Oh, Kingston,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the people on the screen very well.
Kingston, did you say you have a problem with it?
Yeah, I do. I think on the August 23rd on page 3, there's a comment about the chair will have the right to make all committee assignments. And then I think that I made asked that we delay that until the next time around. And I thought we had agreed to that, but it seems the statements says that that the chair has the right to do that. It's contradicted.
I do remember you're requesting that we put that off.
Yeah,
It's in the bylaws.
It's reflected in the bylaw.
It's reflected in the
Right.
bylaws, Kingston.
but I'm just saying the committee, here's this is the last sentence on second paragraph, page 3. The committee agreed to the former suggestion. The suggestion, I made the latter suggestion is all I'm saying.
Okay.
All right.
I know what you're saying.
That's all, just one word change.
Change.
And I'm happy. Yeah,
That's fine.
thank you.
So I amend my suggestion that we accept the minutes with that additional change.
Okay, all in favor?
We need a second.
Second,
Oh, sorry,
I'll second.
thank you.
And since we have remote people, we will have to do roll call.
Oh, right. Martina, will you take the,
Certainly, and that was a motion by member McCauley, seconded by member Minikis to approve the minutes according to the suggested edits on screen, as well as those mentioned by Vice Chair Cole. Starting with a vote of those in attendance, member Chu,
Aye.
member McCauley,
Aye.
member Minikis,
Aye.
member Randolph, member Suggs,
Aye.
Vice Chair Cole,
I
and Chair Howard.
aye.
And that motion does carry by unanimous vote of those in attendance.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 action items.
I think we still need to approve the consent calendar, though.
That was my motion.
That's
Oh,
what we
to-
just did.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
thought just to approve those minutes, the
They,
change,
the 2 items that are on the consent calendar,
Thank
which
you.
are the minutes. Yeah. Okay.
my
Yes,
error.
But Larry, I very much appreciate you kibitzing because by the time any of us figure out how to do this, we're moving on. Okay, so the first item, 7A, is our 2021-22 Year 2 Citizens Oversight Committee Annual Report. And we have an opportunity to approve this. And first, I just want to thank Pat for a huge amount of work getting it finished up. And also Kingston participated in that, I think. Many thanks to both of you. And I don't know that we need any discussion on this before we approve it, but if there is any discussion.
I
Well,
have,
Want to find out whether anyone has any edits they want to make. I don't have any. I'm ready, but you want to survey all of us.
I have a discussion item,
Yes, go
Or-
ahead.
a comment. I'm not going to request a change. I'm just going to make a comment. And then I'll reflect in my vote. I believe I can abstain, and I think I'm going to do that rather than vote no. Because we've discussed these at length. So I'm just going to mention. If I do something parliamentarily inappropriate, somebody who knows better can yell at me. We had discussed on the June 28th meeting a couple of things that are reflected in the minutes from that meeting and on the video, but didn't make it to the report itself. In the beginning of the work plan, under work plan oversight section, which is on page 10 of my numbers, I'm not sure if that's correct. John had agreed to a compromise of adding in a little mini executive summary, combining a couple of items that were in other locations to make a mention about Measure C being complied with or not. That was number one. And then number two was the staff recommendation to add in the quote from Measure C language. And that was actually added in, and everybody had agreed to that. Neither one of those was included in this final document. I don't think it changes the overall outcome. I don't think anyone in the public is going to notice there or not there. I'm just going to make the comment that we did discuss, we were going to add, and we didn't. So I'll just abstain and then we can let it go. If that sounds reasonable, we can move on.
Okay, I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss this issue later on in this meeting, but I think we can move on from it now.
I assume
Any-
that was an oversight at the staff level, right? It wasn't as a result of anyone changing something that was agreed to, right?
I would assume that is the case. I haven't been able to read that carefully and compare what was submitted to the editor. And it's quite possible that through track changes and translation, it dropped off.
Yeah. Well, I remember what happened, and I agree with you, but at the same time, I think there's a great urgency of getting this thing out. And given that it's not changing anything, I thank you for acknowledging that you're not going to vote no. So I just want to make it clear that it wasn't any action of anybody that made it go away. We all agreed to it and it just got missed. So, perfection is what's it for phrase?
Yeah, right.
Enemy of the good.
The enemy of the good. Yeah. Okay.
And that's sort of what I assumed too when I read it through. And I did go back and look at the original draft. And I agree. I think it was just an oversight. So that's why I'm not making a big deal.
Okay.
Good, thank you, Rebecca. Any other comments, concerns, questions?
I'm just really impressed with the final product. It
Mhm.
looks fantastic.
Me too.
I mean, a lot of work went into that. I wasn't expecting it to come out quite like this. So I'm just saying, great job.
Great, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Just leave it on. It's easier.
I would also thank Joanne, who is our graphic designer, because she is the person who did the majority of this work in making it look good.
Yeah, for sure.
It's amazing to see something we've
appreciate
poured
that.
over many, many times when it's well organized with some graphic. It just
Yeah.
makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
Okay,
Should I make a motion?
please do.
please.
I'm fidgety. I'm trying to move along. I make a motion that we accept the item 7A with no amendment.
I second it.
All in favor? Oh, we need a roll call. I'm
And
sorry.
but I'll be quick. That's a motion by member Macaulay, seconded by Vice Chair Cole to accept item 7A without amendments, starting with the vote. Member Chu,
Aye.
member Macaulay,
Aye.
member Minikis,
Aye.
member Randolph,
Hi,
member Suggs,
Abstain?
Vice Chair Cole,
Aye.
Chair Howard, And
Aye.
that is a carried motion by a unanimous vote of all in attendance.
Praise the Lord.
And if I can add another
And
commendation for Joanne, that fantastic work. And I appreciate that she used the style guide that we've created for the MWPA so that it looks and feels like an MWPA product.
and I would also add, one of the hardest things was finding photographs. So if anybody takes photographs during the year, let us know, because they're not, most in existence are already on the website.
Larry, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I'm just looking at what is Measure C, and it says the tax levy is up to 10 cents per building square foot. It's $1 per square foot. It's 10 cents? Oh, why did I think it was okay, thank you.
Okay, and we still don't have any members of the public. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so wonderful. Congratulations, everyone. Let's, are we going to address the bylaws and policies and procedures without Megan here?
We believe we're at a point where we could do it without legal counsel.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns about 7B, the revised bylaws?
So could we get some clarification with regards to the comment, Lisa, proposed language that extends the COC's responsibilities to assess and report on, et cetera, principles of good governance. So is that in or out? It's not in the
That's
document,
Good
right?
point.
So since, it's not in the document yet because the group could not come to consensus. So I would suggest that you guys either say yes to it or no to it. And if you say no to it, it could be that you're going to address it at a later date.
So we hadn't reached consensus at the last
not,
one?
no.
Okay, so my suggestion is we deal with it later.
I'll second.
Do we need to vote on that?
Well, let's vote when we get to the end. So,
Wait.
so far we have no changes to the document. We're just looking through the document elements, if you don't mind me to push in here. And the second one was from Kingston,
Right.
the 6 months to consider. And I think we've agreed that we are going to wait 6 months to consider that, right? So it says the duties of the chair are to preside over meetings and work with the MWPA staff to set the agenda, and it does not include the other element of subcommittees. So I think that's in compliance with what we wanted, right, Kingston?
Yes.
Right. So those are the only comments on there. On that basis, I would again make a motion that we accept it and look at Kingston to come in behind me.
You got it.
Before we do that, clarify that what we're saying is, yes, the chairperson will get together with staff and do the agenda, but no, we're not going to decide yet about subcommittee.
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Document reflects, yeah.
We're gonna do it in a collegial fashion. Work together.
Got it.
Establish trust. All right.
Gotcha.
Use the trust we've already established.
Reinforce the trust.
First force, thank you.
Trust you're cutting my hair, but I'll let you do this.
To clarify what my motion was to, where are we? To accept the revised bylaws of the MWPA Citizens Oversight Committee as reflected in item 7B with no changes.
Second it.
Kingston?
Second. Yeah.
We're a team there.
And that's a motion by member McCauley, seconded by Vice Chair Cole, starting member Chu.
Aye.
Member McCauley,
Aye.
member Minikis,
Aye.
member Randolph,
Aye.
member Suggs,
Aye.
Vice Chair Cole,
Aye.
Chair Howard.
Aye.
Motion carries by unanimous.
We're whipping through this thing.
Wonderful. Moving along. 7C, revised policies and procedures of the MWPA Citizens Oversight Committee.
Mhm.
Do we have any comments, questions, or concerns about this document?
I think we want to discuss number 2 under C and see if we agree on Megan's comment there.
It's fine with me.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only difference.
I think she captured what we were looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Any concerns about it, or shall we move forward and accept this revised document?
I make a motion. Kingston, are you
Kingston,
ready?
please.
No. somebody else for a change. I don't want to be a rubber stamp.
Well, why don't you make the motion and I'll second?
No, no. Jeez.
So you've already made the motion.
It's too fun.
Yeah, God.
All right, I make a motion to accept item C with no changes with regard to the revised policies and procedures of the city's Citizens Oversight Committee.
I shall second.
Thank you, Larry.
And that's a motion by member McCauley, seconded by member Minikis. Starting with member Chu,
Aye.
member McCauley,
Aye.
member Minikis,
Aye.
member Randolph,
Aye.
member Suggs,
Aye.
Vice Chair Cole,
Aye.
Chair Howard.
Aye.
And that motion carries by unanimous vote. And I did want to inform the committee that there are still no attendees virtually or in person.
Thank you.
Okay, we can move on to committee reports. Pat, would you like to tell us about the Board of Directors meeting?
I
Sorry,
wasn't-
Pat, I didn't mean to jump on when I mentioned Danny earlier. Forgive me.
Well, you took away most of
Yeah,
my.
I'm
my-
really, I'm
my
sorry. I'm
report,
sorry. I'm sorry.
That was the, these reports are supposed to reflect if there were any issues that are of concern to us, rather than regurgitating everything that happened at the meeting. But I did think that both the report by Danny Franco and the report by Bill Keene were both very interesting, and everybody would do well to watch the meeting to look at those two. I wish I had the exact time of when, but both of them were toward the end of the meeting.
Yeah, as I said, Danny is at one point 1 hour and 20 minutes.
And that's really all that I have to report from the
Okay,
board
thanks
meeting.
very much.
I-
So
One-
next item, oh,
Oh,
yes, Rebecca.
Rebecca.
One really quick thing that I thought was cute was that it's quite possible that they're gonna do a Doug McConnell open road or some such TV show. And Mark, you may know more about that for MWPA. I think that's really cool.
Oh,
Yeah, so in the effort to continue our outreach and so that people can learn more and more about us, especially Marin residents can learn more and more about us. We have met with Doug McConnell a couple times now. We have an upcoming meeting with Doug McConnell. His Bay Area Back Roads turn into Open Roads, which is a nationally televised show now. And so Open Roads got approved for another season and they're looking at making us one of their episodes. So
Okay.
I'm pretty excited about that.
That was neat. You're 15 minutes. Okay.
That's great. Okay, so we can move on to item 8C. A report and I assume discussion from the planning subcommittee. And John, would you like to lead that discussion?
Sure. And I'll just do a quick summary of it. I know you've all read it. I'm not going to go through every single line of it and then get everyone's reactions to it. The beginning of the document, the first 2 pages, reconsiders or formalizes some of the conversations we've had about the interplay between the tax measure and the JPA agreement. Lucy wrote most of this. I think it's helpful to kind of anchor the baseline under why we're doing our work. One thing I would point out is on page 2, we said it makes common sense to suggest that our review would consider both the purpose and the limits of the MWPA described in the ordinance and the specific limitations and how the jurisdictions share the expenditures as described in the JPA agreement. We also were cautious to make sure that our efforts, as we describe in each of the tracks going forward, are all inclusive. They cover the completeness of each of the areas in one manner or another. Hoping that there's no further conversation about that, I'd like to move on to each of the sections and maybe we could talk about them section by section, if that's okay.
sure.
Well, do you want to go through the whole, I thought you were going to go through the whole thing first, but if you.
I think we do it by just to do
Okay,
each
so
section one at
let's
a
talk
time.
about that for just a minute, okay?
Sure.
There's been a
Overview.
lot of conversation in here about whether or not there's a distinction between the tax measure and the JPA, and
Right.
I thought this was really well done. And, but I wanted to just conclude my understanding, which is that there's no separate track for review, but if there is a discrepancy, then that gets called out, or are you actually, it's a little bit confusing in the way it was written, whether or not there's two.
No, there was a single ever, we started at one point, there was some advocacy to like do one and then do the other. And I suggested that when you do your laundry, you don't use your left socks and then do your right socks, you put all your socks in there together. So this document will cover both elements as we go through the process. And there was concurrence among our subcommittee that that was logical.
Okay, I do think that will need a little bit of clarification if.
So
if
this is a
there's
document just for us to
This is
do our
just a
work
working
plan. So
document.
can we just, yeah. Sorry.
I think it's important that we all understand.
Yes. Okay. Should I?
And as you go through this, John, are we looking at, there are some differences between what we have done in the past and what you're saying, what the team is saying we're going to do in the future?
Yes, this is different. And we'll
Okay.
go through each section and it'll be clear as we go through each section.
Okay, great.
It's building a structure about how we can do this prospectively in a manner which meets all our obligations and is efficient and is clear. You know, as we've gone through a couple of years, we're standing ourselves up. I think we learned a lot as we went through the first couple of years, you know, like particularly on the workflow thing that the three of us were working on. We were trying to figure out how we're going to do it. I think this kind of lays everything out in a way that hopefully is logical and agreeable to us as we proceed. So as an example, if I can move on to the first element, which is the finance track, as to Rebecca, something that could be different. Our view on the finance track is that the finance track historically was not a testing item, particularly was mostly a summarization item, under which at the end, it became pretty apparent whether we met our requirements or not, right? If we spent 30% instead of 20%, that would jump right out at us. Our proposal in terms of the way we move forward is, and I've discussed this already with Elisa and she'd agreed, is that the financial statements could contain every element of what was in that finance track. You know, that table that we've got, that could be in the footnotes to the financial statements, right? And so the aggregation of that information, which Larry has so generously done on his own in the past using pivot tables that, let me tell you, I don't know how to do that, has been prepared. The suggestion on a go forward basis is that staff prepare that summarization in a manner consistent with the way it has been done historically. And that further to that, when the financial statements are drafted, that the financial statements contain all of that data, of which they contain almost all of it already, right? The 220s and the 60 are already in the, in the face of the financial statement. So that's all right. So it's not a big deal to get this done. And in fact, we get a higher level of comfort because to the extent that an item is in a footnote, that means the auditor has to look at it, right? And we also in the document address the timing. If the audit occurs after, there's no reason for us not to complete our work before the audit is complete. If the audit drags on, you know, and it comes up at a later date and there's something discovered, we could go back on that very rare situation and amend our report, but otherwise we can proceed.
Right.
So our suggestion is we just basically kill the finance track on a prospective basis.
Okay. I get it
So,
now.
I just was curious whether, Larry, you had any reservations about that decision, or does that, given that that's been your focus up till now?
I don't have any reservations about it, primarily because we're really not an audit function. The whole idea of my doing that before was, one, to remove the burden from staff, and two, that, you know, it was easy to do for this group. You know, so.
Okay, thank you.
You know,
And I can represent the staff perspective on it. We have no concerns with this.
Great, thanks.
And
the source information. is the same.
Rebecca?
clarification. So, John, I think I heard you say, and Mark, you'd be agreeing, is that algorithms, tables, whatever Larry was doing before, somebody in staff would push the button and make that happen?
Somebody would push this and staff would push the button and make that happen. And more importantly, the results of that aggregation would be specifically included within the audited financial statements, so that the financial statements would contain the one item that really is not in the financials currently already is that table that looks at the 80% expenditures and where we are relative to that. And that's reasonable public information. And Elisa agreed that we could put that into the footnotes. And if it's in the footnotes, it actually has a higher level of review because the auditor would be prescribed, to look at it. So.
And it'll make the MWPA's annual report more informative by including that table.
Yeah. Now, at the end, just to make it clear, when we get together as an organization, one of the steps we would do when we do our report writing, which is, again, extremely simple, you just have to remember, if you saw that the aggregation, for instance, was in excess of 20%, you'd say, hey, what the heck, so it'd be very simple. Those tests are so incredibly simple to do. It takes 10 minutes to read the documents. Most of the efforts that Larry made was assembly. And then we've also kind of tore apart some of the questions which remain open, principally the 10%, the admin question, which needs to be resolved, and however way it is resolved, it will be reflected in the financial statements. So just a way to move forward. So if there's agreement on that, I'll move on to the next item.
And might we want to put some kind of limit parameter boundary on that to say, if the 20% thing comes out at 20.4, we're not going to say anything. If it comes out at 20.24, we might say something.
Well, Rebecca, I think we would conclude that when we look at it, right? So it'll be a nature of our report writing process.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So next item up is the work plan tracks. So you've got your local projects track, and I describe that track as a higher risk area. That being the fact that there's 17 different organizations. I guess we don't have page numbers, sorry. I'm on the 4th page, yeah. I would describe that as a higher risk area, principally because you have 17 different organizations of different levels of sophistication receiving these monies, each of which has their own pressure for budgets and the like. So I would describe this as one that which probably, while we need an oversight of it in its entirety, one that probably we should pay a little bit more attention to. Okay. Our suggestion there is that we look at 5 agencies in detail. As we know, Mark has a requirement now to create a file for every agency that evidences his due diligence with regards to whether the expenditures within those agencies are appropriate. We would pull that file on 5 agencies. And I suggested that San Rafael and Novato be included in this, at least this first cycle. My logic for those 2 organizations is that they are unique in that San Rafael is both a zone, a city, and it's all 3. So there's a pressure of, or a level of oversight that would exist, say, in Southern Marin, where you've got multiple agencies vying for core and curious about how the other 20s are spent, that doesn't exist in San Rafael with regards to local projects. Suggested that we should include those 2, at least the first year, in the 5 we look at. We would look at 5 in detail of the 17, depending on what we find with the 5. If we find that he's done a lousy job and has not been doing a good level of due diligence on those 5, we would have to expand our work, as many as possibly do in all 17 if he spends all his day at lunch. I don't anticipate that, but I think a matter of 5 out of 17 for a deep dive is certainly adequate. In connection with the question of how are we meeting the requirement of the ordinance that says we look at everything, the way we cover that is that we read all 17. We look at the expenditures for all 17, looking for anything that jumps out at us, right? So look at 5 in detail, read all 17 to see if anything looks totally haywire. If there's a bus trip to Reno or whatever within someone's description, we would say red flag, right? So this is a consensus that all 3 of us had, by the way. We all agree on this, the 3 of us. So that was our suggestion as to how we proceed. And that's that section.
So
This is, it came up again in the defensible space track. And I know this is an internal document that's not going to be published anywhere, but you have written on page 5 under the defensible space that San Rafael is both a city and a zone. The zone, that makes us look a little ignorant, because the zone that is San Rafael also has Marinwood Community Services District, and it has some of the county I forget the terminology, CSA.
CSA 13 and CSA 19 are within the San Rafael zone.
So San Rafael
So
isn't.
that would be because I am ignorant. So I didn't know that. So are these beyond the borders of the city of San Rafael? Or
Yeah,
are
so,
they
we're-
subgroups that exist within the city of San
Within the
Rafael?
San Rafael zone, it includes Lucas Valley from Big Rock Ridge east.
Is this county?
So a portion of Lucas Valley in there is CSA 13, but by contract, Marinwood Fire provides fire protection. Then Marinwood CSD is provided by Marinwood Fire, and they have their own employees, but by contract, San Rafael Fire administers Marinwood Fire.
Okay.
Then you have the city limits of San Rafael, and then you have CSA 19, which is essentially Santa Venetia. San Rafael Fire provides the fire response to Santa Venetia, but Marin County Fire provides the fire prevention efforts for both CSA 13 and CSA 19. So it is convoluted.
And then how are funds from MWPA distributed to that convoluted?
So when it comes to Marin County Fire's local mitigation, local project funds and D-Space funds, it is inclusive of CSA 13 and 19. And then when it comes to the core funding, then all of those agencies participate in that core funding. And I'll use San Rafael's core funded, or the San Rafael zone's core funded projects do go into CSA 19, do go into CSA 13, and obviously Marinwood CSD.
So not only to go into them physically, but they're also being done by San Rafael employees.
Actually, no, the projects that are in CSA 13 and CSA 19 are being managed by County Fire.
Okay, so let me ask a broad question, because I was just trying to do a risk assessment, right?
Mhm.
I don't know how material these are. Are we talking 5%, 10% of the total efforts, or are these material? Are they significant? Is there any reason not to choose San Rafael and Novato in our first year?
No.
No, I would agree that I think I praise you for all the work that you have done on this. And I think for the most part, if anything, if we write up anything and it gets out to the public, it should
No,
reflect
that's fine. I mean,
that we understand the complexities of some of these areas. It's just like Southern Marin includes some areas that are county fire, because that all of Marin City comes under.
And Throckmorton.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
when the three of us are writing this up, we didn't catch that
Yeah.
nuance, but thank you for that.
Yeah.
If I would make a suggestion, just literally maybe would one of you make a small change to this document to make that a little more
Yeah,
accurate?
I wrote up some
Good.
words.
So
with
I would
it.
just accept whatever you said. And this is an internal document. It's just for us to do our scoping, but nonetheless, we wouldn't want to appear ignorant,
And
even if we are.
and so John, from my perspective of staff, I think you picking Novato and San Rafael is actually, those are valid, because like you said, Novato Fire District pretty much is all of the Novato zone. There's tiny little pockets of county fire that's not even worth
Okay,
mentioning.
fine.
But
Okay.
the complexities of San Rafael and the hidden little jurisdictions make sense.
Okay.
And then the only other thing would be I can't remember if this is worded this way or not somewhere, but that Novato Fire District is the member and Novato City is not.
Yeah,
So-
I reflect that later. We were aware of that. We got that one right. Yeah, you're right. I was aware of that. And that comes into the D-Space part, right? Okay. Yeah, so as far as D-Space is concerned, as I understand it, there are 4 D-Space groups now coming to, this is on the year we're auditing, and potentially 3 prospectively is what I said. My suggestion there is, because you have lead agencies taking care of each of these efforts, that we would look at 2 of the 4 I suggested that San Rafael be one of the two for the same reason as described. And I did not pick Novato for the exact reason that Rebecca just made, because it's independent and separate. So it's no different than Southern Marin or anywhere else. Whoever's on that stream can pick a second one. Half of everything would be looked at precisely. You could then also interview Mark from the broader perspective of how do you make sure that employees are, not 100% paid from this fund when they're only spending 10% of their time on this fund and the like. I'm sure that the team that takes this on can do an adequate diligence that covers both the specifics of a couple of them and broad-based understanding. It meets our obligations with regards to the ordinance. So that was our thought there. Any comments on that?
A tiny comment, and I'm not sure, Mark, you can step in here, but I do know, I believe Novato has requested some core funds to be spent on D-Space in addition to their regular D-Space money. Is that not true? And then do we need to pay attention to D-Space differently for them?
I don't believe it's Novato. Central Marin has a D-Space core project that helps to fund the D-Space program.
Okay, then never mind about Novato.
But with regards to anybody who chooses to take some of their, is it core or is it the other one? It's core out of the core side?
Yeah, Central Marin actually has a core project to help augment the D-Space funding because they don't feel the 20% is enough.
Adequate.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that core went through all the reviews that any other core item would go through.
Yep.
And we're not supposed to second guess management decision making. So, okay. Okay. If that part's done, are you guys good with that? Then the next group is core. As far as core is concerned, while I would describe that it is 60%, I would say that the local projects at 20% is a higher risk item than the 60% item, because the 60% item has thousands of eyes looking at it, right? Through all the various subcommittees and the like. So our suggestion there was comprised of basically multiple steps. We would, in order to meet our obligation for the ordinance, we would read all the documents looking for red flags, right? See if anything jumps out. That would be, we'd be the fourth level of review of those things, but it's a possibility. In addition to that, we would have a targeted review specifically of staff positions to make sure that there's no sins in the staff position area. And it just seems like that's an item, at least in this 1 year, that we would want to specifically review Mark's work in that area. We're not doing this ourselves. We're looking at what he's doing. And then that would be the extent of efforts in this area. So it's heavy touch on the what do you call it? The first section on local projects. If you want to allocate your time, local projects is only 20%. I'd say we'd spend as much time on local projects as we spent on the 60% area, just acknowledging the difference of relative oversight. That's what auditors do in connection with that. So that was our approach that we all felt was appropriate as far as the core expenditure track was concerned. So simply read the documents, look for red flags, do a targeted review of staff positions, and that would be how we would cover that.
So
I want,
go ahead, Rebecca.
I spoke a lot. Go, Jennifer.
Well, I just want to say I don't disagree with the idea that 60% has a lot of eyes on it. We may not have a lot to say or need to drill down on anything, but in future, it really represents a much larger portion of the taxpayer money. And so in future, we may have something we feel the need to
this is a
drill down
1-year
on.
plan. I mean, basically what we're doing, by the way, is by reviewing the level of staff due diligence across all operations, we are, if you want to get all COSO about it, anyway, we would be assessing the overall quality of management's oversight, which is applicable to all elements. And your bundle of comfort includes that conclusion,
Rebecca.
right?
Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This sounds good to me, especially since it's in there that says we will read the work plan and any documents prepared. Definitely that, would have been my number one flag, is if we're not reading the work plan, but if we are. And the other thing I would say is if and when we find anything as we are reading the work plan that looks like we have a question, to watch for, when is that going to get discussed at the ATC and the ops level, so that we can be there and hear what are they already discussing about it, so we know, aha, we still have an issue, or no, it's already been really vetted, it's been really discussed, and we don't need to bring it up again.
Well, you have to recall that we're looking back a year, so we would look back at our year, and if we as an organization found an issue with something, just like we did with our famous Rangers, then it would end up going into our report, and certainly we would give sunshine to that through Mark in advance of that, right? So the result would be a finding from our perspective if we had trouble and with a red flag we saw in one of these areas.
Rebecca, this is something I've been thinking a lot about because our timing is so difficult. And so if we are able to, in our perfect world, get a report out for 22, 23 soon, we could turn our minds to the following year and think about in a more proactive way what they're doing next spring in preparation for 24, 25. But we're a little behind.
Yeah, my document makes reference to the fact that we could start each of these sections much earlier, and some of it actually during the year rather than after the year, to accomplish our tasks. I think I make a statement about that earlier on. So, but we have to get, now that we've got this year's out, last year's out, and this is now 2 years ago out, now we're going to be working on last year's, right? So if we get last year's done in a reasonable period of time, you ought to be able to jump on the next cycle while it's actually happening. Some of the reviews of depending on when Mark does his due diligence reviews, I'm assuming he's not going to wait until after year end to do all of them. But if he's doing some of them during the year, we can piggyback during the year. And we'll certainly be giving him feedback this year on our sense of the level of work that's being performed. And in fact, you could actually almost, if we found we had some significant agita in the first couple of things we looked at, you can go back and kind of do more, right, before the report period is over. So.
And I thought you were saying earlier, and in the document, was that, yes, we ought to be looking earlier. I totally agree. And maybe we ought to even think about having some of the group start to get at this next report, but then having some of the group focused on the other part that, can we go to some ATC and ops meetings and actually start to think about the next batch, even while we're working on last year's.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Thank you, John, for the tremendous amount of work.
There's a lot of work. I would also acknowledge, though, that we're not to second guess decision-making at the ATC and ops level with regards to appropriate expenditures, right? Our job is not to go in and say, we think you should do B instead of A when both A and B are allowed, right? The only time we get involved in is if we believe that something is not inside the circle of the ordinance and the JPA agreement. Now, we also have the ability, as we go through things, as we experienced, as we already showed this year, if we see something that jumps out at us from an operational perspective that puzzles us, for instance, the idea that we talked about how there's multiple levels of monies being spent for home hardening, we can make those kind of comments, but it's not our core job. Our core job is just to ensure that what is spent is inside the barriers. We're not board. We're not the board. So.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that in a big way. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, I had a question for Mark. We're approaching the end of September, so we're 3 months removed from the end of the fiscal year. Let's say that I did all the number crunching again this year. Would the GL be ready to send, would that be available, or do you still have closing items? Are there still year-end adjustments to make?
Following the October 19th meeting, that's when we make the year-end adjustments, is October 19th.
Okay.
At the board meeting.
Yeah. So if that gets approved by our next meeting, and whether staff does it or I do it, we could have all that probably in the first or second week in November. So in terms of the financial review, other than the parts that you have to review projects and money that roll over from one year to the next, you can make a determination on, like 8 of the 9 or 10 metrics that,
Yeah.
we report on now.
That's right. Yeah, and with regards to the question of rollover, because our subcommittee talked about this a little bit, there's been this focus it's in some of our prior reports. If you budget 100 and then you spend 70, there's been a big angst about, well, why was it 70 and not 100? And what are we doing about that 30? As a subcommittee, we talked about this at length. And the reality is that if we have the joy of something costing less than it was anticipated to cost, clearly it was not involving any contractors that I know, then as long as the expenditures that make up the rest of it are appropriate elements that sit within that bucket, then there's no big issue. And to the extent alternatively that you underspend the goal there, which is, I think I've written down in here in the documents, you make sure that it is put aside and remains available to spend only on our actions, right? On MWPA qualified expenditures. And that would be a point of focus on all three of the groups. But just because something is, if someone U-turns and spends less on something and spends more on something else, as long as he makes sure that all those items are appropriate, I don't think we need to get into all this level of detail. There's not, as long as they're appropriate expenditures, they sit inside the bucket of the four corners of what we're supposed to look at. So, and that's reflected there.
Right.
The only thing left was transparency. I think on transparency, as we mentioned, Kingston reflected that we should probably give it one more shot, and we added that to the document. I presume that might be a team of one, a man with a headphone.
Whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the scope. You can really, then when I would suggest, if you don't mind, that if that's agreeable, that the next step would be to start assigning people to each of those subgroups so that we can start launching and get through this thing, because after your next meeting, I would assume that the subgroups could start their work. Right?
Yeah, that was going to be the next question. Mark, would you be ready for us to start interviewing you with, in our separate groups?
Yeah.
And looking at you would be.
Yeah.
Okay. That's because I was really hoping we could go from this sort of theoretical to a very practical next step.
Yeah, I wrote this literally as a work program. So like, tear off your page and go do it. I mean, that was kind of what my idea was. Now that we, last year we struggled, particularly in work plan as to how we all fit together. And I think now we've got a foundational, description of what our obligation should be. So
I had this idea, and I don't know whether it fits with anybody else's thinking about how, this all seems really good to me. And until I dig into whatever I'm responsible for, I won't know exactly how it works for me, but it all makes sense. And I wondered whether it made any sense to anybody if, let's say I'm working on local and I'm looking more deeply into 5 different member agencies' activities, and I have a bunch of questions. Does it make any sense to have member agency representatives come to our meetings to let us ask questions, pre-identified questions more thoroughly?
I think that we talk to Mark
First, of course.
and then we get answers from Mark. And I wrote it in this document. And to the extent that Mark doesn't have answers, he goes out and gets more from the agencies. And I think it would be rare for us to have to penetrate specifically into an agency. I think that the obligation is, sorry, let me finish. The obligation is of MWPA management to make sure the money is well spent. So that's my thought. I mean, there could be a one-off, but I would think that the need to go to an individual agency would be rare and would indicate that Mark has had an issue because he didn't meet his obligation.
That makes sense. I was just thinking from that it would be interesting and informative and educational. Well, informative and educational, that's redundant, but I really appreciate the idea that our job is to get what we need from Mark, from staff, and to go back to you for whatever we need.
Okay.
Yes, Rebecca.
Question about that. and I may have missed something in one of the prior conversations about this topic of our liaison for everything being staff. No reflection at all on any personalities, and definitely not about Mark. Is it appropriate for us to be going to staff for all the answers that we're going to get and all the documents we're going to use when staff reports to board, is hired by board, and board are elected officials? I am concerned that why wouldn't we go directly to the source documentation, the source people providing the information, and not rely totally on staff and the people they report to?
If staff does their job right, that should be adequate. If staff does their job right, they should be able to convince us that adequate due diligence was done.
And if we're not convinced, then that's what we report on.
Right.
I'm
A city council model, if you will, a city council model, city council members go to the city manager. They don't go down to DPW. They don't go down to, planning or whatever. The city council hires the city manager, and then the city manager controls all the staff. So, I mean, that's how the council process works. Otherwise it gets totally out of control because staff don't know who they work for. And, if you have 5 council members, you have 5 different views on things, you have a problematic situation. So this would be in my view, the normal way to conduct matters of this type, is to work with management of the organization, because their job is just to make sure the money is well spent, right? I mean, some of these expenditures he is going to be reviewing will be with contractors, right? A lot of them in core is going to be with contractors. I don't think we go to contractors and, see their budgets for gasoline or whatever. I mean, I think that's his job.
And as one of the staff members that would likely bear the majority of the burden, I actually do think that this workflow makes sense, that it's the JPA that has the Citizens Oversight Committee. It's the JPA that has the obligation to ensure that the monies are spent appropriately. It's not necessarily down at the member agency level. So it's my job to hold them accountable.
Yeah, you have to hold them accountable.
And it's your guys to make sure your guys' job to make sure I'm holding them accountable.
Exactly. Right. Rebecca, does that answer your question?
It answers the question I posed. It doesn't allay my concern. If I take myself out of the role of being a COC member, if I say I'm just a member of the public, and I look at the COC to say, is my money being spent well? If the COC member answered, yeah, staff showed us the documentation that staff says we're doing a good job, I would be concerned as a member of the public that the COC wasn't somehow more connected to the actual.
Well, respectfully, that would imply that we are doing a crappy job because we should be able to ask any question we want to Mark, and you should be able to answer any question we ask. And he should have already in his work had adequate evidence to make us, as we are the public. That's who we are, right? So when we go and talk to him, we're not talking to him as, we're talking to represent the public. So we go in representing the public and say, hey, you've just got 20 million bucks. How'd you spend it? Did it comply with the ordinance and the JPA agreement? And he needs to convince us that he's done enough work that meets that compliance.
And I'll give an example of a satisfactory test that most of the agencies have salaries for DSpace inspectors built into their local DSpace plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then I need to see that there's salary records for those personnel and that they're focusing on DSpace work. And then that's how I ensure through the salary records and what their workflow is that Measure C money of the 20% has been appropriately spent.
And they're not riding around in the back of a fire truck responding to calls.
Correct.
Right. Right.
Larry.
Okay.
Hey, Rebecca, just as a matter of clarification, Are you suggesting that you'd be more comfortable if you had an independent assessment of everything?
Yeah, however, I realize the impracticality of that. And I'd say, I don't know exactly what it is I'm asking for. It just seems like we are investing a lot of the faith and trust in staff. And again, current staff and current board, no problem. Everybody's together.
I would suggest you use the wrong words with faith and trust. Verification and evidence is what we're looking for. Not faith and trust, verification and evidence.
Very good.
Trust and verify.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Have we heard that one?
Yeah.
you see, it sounds like you still see our role as the same as what an auditor's doing, which is an independent third-party assessment. Is that correct?
Kinda, yeah.
Well, then I would continue to make the assertion that's not our role as a COC. I mean, that's what the auditors are there for.
So,
Go ahead.
well,
I'll also, oh no, go ahead, Rebecca, finish what
No,
you're.
say, I'll just watch the process and be involved, and I'll get it. I'm sure it'll hit me at some point.
Yeah, and if something highly unusual happens, it doesn't mean we're putting a, big fence around things, but this is just the normal way that you would proceed with these kinds of activities, right? And just, we want to have a baseline of our understanding of how we get to our comfort. We're filling a bucket full of comfort. That's what we're trying to do. And what this document describes is how we fill each of the elements of that comfort, both reflecting the risks that are associated with them, and the level of work that we are doing, and the overall comfort we get by the internal control process that exists within the organization. The fact that we've got 4 committees looking at all this kind of stuff, the fact that as we look at his work, we will form a conclusion as to whether the quality of his work is together. All those things go into this bucket of confidence that we can go back out to the public and say, yeah, we're comfortable, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is we still have to review the audit.
Yeah.
So,
And-
I mean, the loop to
Um,
me seems close at that point.
First, Larry wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate something I brought up in the past, that we have another check and balance in here in the board itself, because there's self-interest within each board member to make sure that the others aren't taking advantage of it. So there is even without us, there's this natural checks and balances that's there, I believe.
No, I agree. That's right. That's why I reflected core as being lower risk than the others for that exact reason.
Yeah.
Because you're fighting with each other. Yeah.
Pat, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, and it's when Larry talks about the audit, and there is an auditor, there's not an audit for things that are non-financial. And I think that's what Rebecca's talking about, and playing the devil's advocate. It just seems to me that there is a place for going to the Novato shaded fuel break and looking to see, did they actually clear something? Or that's just an example, but I can see, and I'm one of these people who goes on every field trip except the one to Stinson Beach, because I didn't want to drive that
It was
far.
fun. Oh, you should have gone with us.
But,
Shoot.
to know that this work is actually, to visibly see that work is actually being done, I think is important. I think that there is some role, some auditing function of ours to go out to.
So that's built into our process because we attend these meetings and we're aware that these field visits are occurring, right? And we're aware that the board and all these people are going to these places. That all goes into our bucket.
Well, and I
Right.
would agree with you that if we, that's assuming that we are monitoring meetings and that some of us are going to field trips.
The way to flip it around is to say that there's no eyes, that no one has gone up in the hills to see whether the trees are cut down, right? And in other words, turn it upside down and say, okay, he's saying they spent money and the city is saying we spent money and no one's looking. Now, that's not our environment. We get to take credit in our environment for our knowledge of the fact that the IJ writes about it, and there's meetings about it, and there's visits you can make and all that stuff. This is not from, I'm moving from an academic exposure to the real conditions that exist within this organization. And this, because in my old world, you had to assess the quality of an organization. And if the organization was a crappy organization, which you sometimes run into, we would generally not continue with them as a client. But, your level of work changes dramatically, or if there's fraud in an organization, then you get heavily involved. And all those things are built into a decision about how you approach an effort such as ours. And that's how we've built into this document our cumulative knowledge we've gotten over the last 3 years of the organization. And the three of us felt that this was an appropriate way to get there. And there was a high level of focus, Rebecca, with the question. We knew that you were concerned, and Lucy filled that role with regards to the question of making sure we went across everything. I would actually argue you wouldn't necessarily do that, but in the idea of reaching a common acceptable answer, I put that one aside. I actually don't think you have to read everything, but that's okay. That's just my view. I'm ready to go with the consensus. But there was Lucy represented that point of view well when the three of us got together. This didn't come out in 10 minutes, and we spent a fair amount of time on this to get it.
I think I want to say that this makes a lot of sense for getting the job done of putting out a report. I think, and it to me, it defines the role of a COC, special audit, or a journalist, or somebody doing other kinds of work, other third party people other than those of us who have this specific job to do. But Pat, I think that what you're talking about, that those of us who go on field trips and who learn more about what's happening on the ground really bring an important element to our ability to review all these things. The more you know about what's actually being done, the more you'll be able to look at the reports that Mark provides. So, and I think if we do a good job of doing that, we're going to be way ahead of where we've been, and we'll see red flags if they come up, and then we'll go further.
And I would also add that I think from the beginning, MWPA is in and of itself one of a kind in the country, probably in the world. So this COC may have to be one of a kind and do things a little differently than other COCs do. And if that means, as Jennifer says, we go the little bit extra in the mile, as Pat pointed out, go to these meetings, pay more attention, start from the beginning of the year, be a little more involved. That may not be what a usual COC does, but we're also looking at a whole different kind of animal than has ever existed before.
And like I said before, I'm just going to say it again. I think all of that activity makes us better at doing the job that your committee, John, has defined as how we can get our report done.
Yep.
So is there consensus that this creates a decent foundation document, subject to my ignorance on that one topic, for us to move forward?
Yeah.
I think it does. Yes.
Okay. Then perhaps you might want to put out and ask people to, now that we've got a defined group of things to work on, ask for volunteers for each of them, and
Oh, and what's the vision about what each of them is? Are each of these titles a subcommittee, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, there's no longer a finance track, right? So there'll be a local projects track, there'd be a defensible space track, there'd be a core expenditures track, and a very small transparency track.
Right. That works.
And so what about tax measure and JPA agreement review? Is that a different track or part of the others?
To repeat what we said earlier, you wash your socks both at the same time. As we're doing these things, we will be accomplishing tasks that, as we've laid out in the document, that comply both with the JPA agreement and with the measure.
Okay.
I understood that section correctly, and I was trying to articulate it earlier, was that we look at everything with the knowledge of both.
Yeah,
those.
I mean,
And if there's a discrepancy of some sort,
Well,
then
how
we
can it
call
be
that. I don't know.
There's no such thing as a discrepancy. It's an and. The whole thing about this is it's an and, not an or. It's an and. It has to comply with the tax measure, which means they have to be for wildfire prevention. And it has to meet the 60-20-20. Right? If something meets the 60-20-20 and does not comply, you can spend local money and it makes 20%, but you spend it on something that is outside of wildfire prevention, then that's an error, right? And it's a function, you have to comply with both.
Okay, I was just actually using the wrong word, but in your document, it says if there are any inconsistencies with the tax measure. I was using discrepancy, but it was inconsistency was the
Yeah, that
word.
was Lucy wrote that. Yeah.
Then the issues would be flagged in this section of the report.
In the sections of the report, right?
So that somehow, this is where I was a little confused. It implied that there might be two
Well,
sections, but let's,
Yeah, at one point we were going down a path of 2 reviews and that made no sense to me because you don't review it once
Okay.
and then review it again. You just review it once. And we collectively came to agreement on that. And maybe it's not perfectly written, but that's what we're trying to reflect is we do everything one time.
okay, I'm not suggesting it should be perfectly written. It just needs to
Yeah.
be perfectly understood.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So I think at the moment, I would be interested in knowing of the people here where they would like to put energy for the next report. So I don't want to commit to making the committees right now, but I'd like to know who would like to work on what. Does anybody want to jump in?
I'd like to work in the local projects report because I think that's one that probably needs careful eyes.
Larry, do you have any
I
specific?
haven't really given it.
I'm sorry, could you say it again?
I haven't really given it.
Okay,
much
very
thought,
good. Pat?
honestly.
But we have 9 members, right?
Yeah.
How many are we anticipating for each subcommittee? If we do
3.
3 in each?
Yeah. And then if you don't mind, also covering transparency.
Yeah, I'll carry that one. Yeah, I can do that. If anybody else wants to join me, that's fine.
I'm
But-
assuming we'd have 3 significant committees and the transparency committee would be like extra is what I was.
Yeah, right.
We do 3 across the 3 groups, local, D-Space and core, 3 people for each and then get on with it.
Jennifer, do you want to just have everybody just get back to you? Or
Yeah, I just want to hear from anybody if they already know what they'd like to do. And then I want to ruminate on this. And I do think we should move forward as quickly as we can. So anybody who wants to send me a note that hasn't made a comment today, Larry.
I guess if I had to pick one right now, it would be the local projects because that would probably have the most where we are dealing with needing to assemble numbers as opposed to having them already created because there's that rollover from year to year.
I would think several of you that are really into watching like all the big stuff would be best on core, right?
Yeah, I'll volunteer for core. Okay.
I mean, it seems to me the core is for the people who really have the broadest understanding of the organization. Like, for instance, know that San Rafael is not just San Rafael. I'm going to keep making that joke. But then the other 2, both D-Space and local, those are relatively consistent. They're kind of an audit function. Right? Now, the D-Space one is more targeted. We're going to look at, what do I say, 2 out of 4, right? And then on this other group, we're going to look at 5 out of 17. So those 2 skill sets seem relatively consistent, but I wouldn't want to be on core because I don't know enough about the big picture. I'm more into all the audity kind of stuff. I don't get all excited about some of the big picture stuff. So I wouldn't be good at that.
And Jennifer, I would volunteer for core first.
You would like to participate on a core committee?
Yeah.
I think
But
it's great for
happy-
core.
Yeah,
If I was
Yeah, I do
picking
too.
people, I know how I do it, but
yeah. We have 2 on core then. Okay.
That's great. I'm going to repeat what I have. And if anybody else wants to chime in. So, John, you'd like to work on the local projects, Kingston, transparency and core. Pat and Larry, I'll talk to you offline.
I'll work on local.
You'll work on
I'll
local.
work on local.
We're getting, that makes 3 for local, so.
Yeah.
local
Okay,
would be
and
4, right?
Rebecca, you will work on core.
Yep.
Okay,
I said that because I'm anticipating that Lucy would probably like to work on core too, is what I'm thinking.
okay.
Yeah.
Where should we put Jenny? Mark, do you have anything to say about this process right now?
No,
yeah.
I like the traction.
Okay, good.
You like the traction? Is that what you said?
Attraction.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
You know, I would lean toward D-Space just because I already know a fair amount about.
I was
it.
thinking you would be very helpful there.
So,
Yeah, okay.
Remember, we may have some new members coming on board
Yeah.
in mid process. So
Unless we get it all done
So,
at the end of the
Uh,
calendar year.
so if I may
Good.
make one statement, I'm trying to be somewhere for a 5:30 meeting. So could I be pushy and suggest that we kind of keep going?
Yeah, we're getting there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
so what's next?
Does anybody have any future agenda items they would like to request?
And I'm just double checking, making sure we still have no members of the public to comment. but
Oh,
we
thank
don't.
you. We don't, do we?
Okay.
No. I guess I got a little lazy and expected Martina to wave at me if we did.
The public be damned. Okay.
Oh, thanks, Ben.
We'll put that into our next report.
Right. I'll put that in the minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Scratch that. So, on the future agenda items, I would, from a staff perspective, I've heard you guys talk about that should be an agenda item next month, is to form these committees. You've received feedback, but the next meeting, it should be agenda item to formally form those committees.
Okay.
Like, can I make one short announcement if that's okay? So between now and our next meeting, I've been teasing you all about this big effort I've been making with Google and the city of Mill Valley to
Yeah.
do an extensive, robust evacuation study. It is now pretty much set for the 16th of October. So I've just reviewed the flyover an hour ago for our presentation. Looks pretty good. So I will, when it becomes public, which is probably around the 11th, I'll give it to Mark and share it with you guys you may find interested in. And of course, you could dial into the city council meeting if you want to hear me gab at that. And you just can't Zoom bomb us.
Yeah, right.
That was October 16th at what time?
It's the night meetings, 5:30 is when it starts. But I will ask that the council meeting announcement gets sent to you guys along with the staff report, so you can see the staff report.
Great, interesting.
And hopefully you'll find it interesting.
Larry, yes.
I'm not sure about this, but as a matter of process, do we need to vote on accepting the planning subcommittee comments, or we just?
I don't think so.
Discussion
It's
only.
not,
Okay.
no, it's just a,
I wasn't sure.
yeah, thank you. Anything else? I'm a little bit curious about something before we break up. Do we always have November and December meetings? I think we probably should, so we can get moving on this next report, but I just want to make sure.
We have, and we've typically moved them so they are away from the holidays.
Right.
Very good. Okay. Okay, if there's no further comments, questions, concerns, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.